Let's go Dolphins! A question has quietly started spreading across Dolphins Nation over the last few days. And the more people talk about it, the more divided fans become. Should the Miami Dolphins make one more big move before the season starts? Or is the front office finally doing the right thing by trusting the young players already on the roster? Because one name keeps popping up. Stefon Diggs. And whether you love the idea or hate it, there's no denying one thing. If Diggs walked into the Dolphins facility tomorrow, he would instantly become one of the biggest stories of the entire offseason. But here's where things get really interesting. The conversation isn't just about Stefon Diggs. It's about something much bigger. It's about the direction of the franchise. It's about whether the Dolphins are truly committed to building through youth, or whether they're one injury away from making another aggressive veteran move. And honestly, I think what we're about to discuss says a lot more about the future of the Dolphins than it does about Stefon Diggs himself. Because while national analysts are suddenly praising Miami's offseason decisions, while people continue talking about the Jaylen Waddle trade, while Devon Achane's extension is earning praise around the league, there's still one position group that continues generating concern. Wide receiver. And that's why this debate refuses to disappear. Before we go any further, make sure you've already smashed that like button if you're excited to see the next generation of Dolphins players prove themselves this season. And today I want to hear from the most optimistic Dolphins fans watching. Drop this comment below right now. Go Dolphins! Trust the future. Let's see how many Dolphins fans believe the young talent on this roster is ready to surprise people. Now, my personal opinion is simple. I completely understand why some fans want Stefon Diggs. A veteran receiver. A proven playmaker. A player who has produced at a high level. A player who could potentially help a young quarterback. But at the same time, I think there's a reason the Dolphins haven't made that call. And that reason may tell us everything we need to know about how this new regime plans to build the roster moving forward. Because what Rich Eisen recently said about the Dolphins may have revealed something that many fans are only starting to realize now. And if he's right, the deeper you look at this situation, the more it feels like the Dolphins are standing at a crossroads. Because there are really two completely different philosophies at play here. One path says you bring in a veteran like Stefon Diggs. You add experience. You add proven production. You give your young quarterback another established target. And you try to maximize the offense immediately. The other path is very different. That path says you've already committed to a rebuild of sorts. You've already made difficult decisions. You've already traded Jaylen Waddle. You've already invested heavily in younger players. So now it's time to find out what those young players actually are. And honestly, when you examine everything the Dolphins have done recently, the second option appears much closer to reality. Because let's think about what happened this offseason. Miami made a decision that shocked a lot of fans. They moved on from Jaylen Waddle. Not because he wasn't talented, not because he wasn't productive, but because the organization believed the long-term value of the return package made sense for where the franchise is heading. And according to the discussion surrounding the move, that return helped bring in players that the Dolphins clearly believe can become important parts of the future. Chris Johnson, Chris Bell, Trey Moore. Young players who now represent a major part of Miami's long-term vision. That's why the Diggs conversation becomes so fascinating. Because signing Diggs would almost feel like a completely different strategy. One built around immediate help rather than long-term development. One built around certainty rather than projection. One built around proven production rather than potential. Now, does that automatically make signing Diggs a bad idea? Not necessarily, because nobody can deny what he has accomplished. The production speaks for itself. The experience speaks for itself. And the argument that he could help a developing quarterback isn't difficult to understand. But this is where concerns begin entering the conversation. Because whenever people discuss Diggs, they don't only talk about football. They also talk about everything that comes with him. The questions. The distractions, the off-field discussions, the locker room conversations that have followed him throughout different stages of his career. Whether those concerns are fair or unfair isn't really the point. The point is that they exist. And any organization considering a veteran player has to weigh both the production and the potential complications. That's simply part of the evaluation process. Another factor that shouldn't be ignored is what Rich Eisen said about the Dolphins' offseason approach. Because his comments weren't focused on one player. His comments were focused on the direction of the organization itself. The belief that Miami may actually be doing the right thing. The belief that the team is making logical long-term decisions. And the belief that some of the unpopular moves could eventually prove beneficial. That's significant, because for years, Dolphins fans have debated whether the organization had a clear plan. Now, some national voices are beginning to suggest they do. Of course, plans only matter if they work. That's the reality. Draft picks have to develop. Young players have to improve. And coaches have to put those players in positions to succeed. That's why the wide receiver room remains one of the most important storylines on the roster. Because eventually the Dolphins need somebody to emerge. Somebody needs to become reliable. Somebody needs to become productive. Somebody needs to prove the organization was right to trust the younger players. And that's where names like Kevin Coleman Jr., Caleb Douglas, Malik Washington, Jaylen Tolbert, and others become so important. Because if those players develop, the Dolphins won't need a veteran solution. The solution will already be on the roster. But if they don't, then this conversation may look very different a few months from now. And that's why training camp suddenly becomes so critical. Because this isn't just a battle for roster spots. It's a battle for trust. It's a battle for opportunity. And it's a battle that could determine whether Miami continues investing in youth or eventually looks outside the organization for help. Right now, the Dolphins appear willing to let the young players prove themselves. Right now, they appear willing to be patient. Right now, they appear willing to trust the process they've started building. The question is whether those young receivers will reward that trust. And Dolphins fans, let me ask you this. And that may ultimately be the biggest gamble the Dolphins are making this entire offseason. Patience. Because patience is easy to talk about in June. Patience is easy to talk about during OTAs. Patience is easy to talk about when nobody has played a meaningful game yet. The real challenge comes when the season starts. The real challenge comes when Malik Willis drops back on third down and needs somebody to get open. The real challenge comes when defenses focus on taking away Miami's primary options. That's when we'll find out whether this young receiving group is truly ready. And that's exactly why the Stefon Diggs conversation refuses to disappear. Because Diggs represents certainty, at least compared to what Miami currently has. You know what he is. You know what he's done. You know he can handle a large workload. You know he can produce at a high level. Those things aren't projections. They're already on his resume. The young receivers don't have that advantage. They're still trying to prove themselves. They're still trying to earn trust. They're still trying to show that they can become reliable contributors at the NFL level. And that's why training camp could become one of the most important periods for this entire offense. Because every practice rep matters. Every target matters. Every preseason snap matters. The Dolphins need answers. Not next year. Not in 2 years. They need answers now. What's interesting is that Miami appears comfortable living with uncertainty. At least for the moment. That tells me something. It tells me the coaching staff and front office may believe more strongly in these young receivers than many fans realize. Otherwise, wouldn't they already be aggressively pursuing veteran help? Wouldn't they already be trying to add another established name? So far, that hasn't happened. Instead, the message appears fairly clear. Opportunity is available. The young players simply need to take it. And that's where names like Kevin Coleman Jr. become fascinating. That's where Caleb Douglas becomes fascinating. That's where Malik Washington becomes fascinating. Because every one of those players now has a chance to become part of the solution. Sometimes organizations discover stars because they have no choice but to give young players opportunities. Sometimes future contributors emerge because there isn't a veteran standing in front of them on the depth chart. And maybe that's exactly what Miami wants to find out. Maybe they want to know who can handle the pressure, who can handle the responsibility, who can become a legitimate piece of the future. At the same time, nobody should pretend there's no risk involved. There absolutely is. Young players are unpredictable. Development isn't always linear. Some prospects break out immediately. Others need time. And some never become what teams hope they would be. That's why the next few months are so important. Because the Dolphins aren't just evaluating receivers. They're evaluating the direction of the franchise. If these young players emerge, Miami's offseason strategy starts looking brilliant. If they struggle, questions about veteran additions like Stefon Diggs will only grow louder. Then there's another layer to this story. Malik Willis. Because the development of the young receivers and the development of the quarterback are connected. A quarterback benefits from